Hey guys, today I have my friend Josiah with me. I'm excited as always. He's got a great story. Met Josiah on Instagram. I guess I met him on his alt page, which he does AI art and he also does um, geometry. And it was just really beautiful and amazing. And I also love all the insight he had and spiritual wisdom. And so yeah, I became friends with him. We had a chat and thought we'd have a podcast episode and yeah, talk about his religious upbringing, his spiritual journey, and how different spiritual practices have helped him in his life. So, how you doing today, Josiah?
Oh man, I'm awesome. It's great to be here. We were just chatting beforehand, and I'm really glad we met. And if it's okay with you, I would like to just kind of open with just a little prayer, just a little way to get engaged here.
Yeah,
If that's okay with you. Yeah.
sure.
Okay. Okay. Father, Spirit, we just come into alignment with who we are, which is who you are. We ask for a greater awareness, and we receive a greater awareness of your presence, that is not without us, but is that it is within us. I speak to the soul. I speak to the inner parts of our beings, that they just be illuminated during this conversation, and that ultimately truth and love and light just be evident all over this conversation. And yeah, we're just happy to be here. That's it.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's a first on
Yeah.
the on the podcast. I appreciate that.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
It's been interesting in my own spiritual journey and kind of going away from prayer, and then I had to rethink about it and come
Hmm.
back to it in a new way, and still, I guess, learning and figuring out how do I want to pray now?
That's
What is
right.
it like to pray, and what's authentic? So yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, you want to get into your upbringing?
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah. So, my name is Josiah. I currently live in the Atlanta region of Georgia, kind of like the suburbs of Atlanta. Um, I did not grow up here. I do not have an accent. I grew up in New York, Long Island, New York. The main point of I guess the background that I'd like to highlight is the religious upbringing, because that's kind of what we're probing today, is the spirituality, the religious stuff. So I grew up in a non-denominational, very end times focused megachurch in New York City. Times Square Church is the name of it. It's about 8 blocks away from where the celebration is for New Year's. Mega church. Many nationalities represented there, but as I said, very end times focused, very fear based teachings. There was a lot of good. There was a lot of good. I made a lot of friends. My first best friends, were all in that church. I really didn't know much outside of the church. I was homeschooled up until about fifth grade, and in at the beginning of fifth grade, I had transitioned from homeschool to public school. In Long Island, it was a pretty rough neighborhood. I was the only white kid in a all Hispanic community. So naturally, there was going to be some bullying. There was going to be some unpleasant things that happened during that transition, and it was tough. Kind of always felt like an outsider there in my home and that environment, but also in church. Church was our life. My father was an elder, which in that church kind of meant you're basically an associate pastor. You teach, you do all the things. In addition to being an elder, he was also the full-time security director on staff. So he traveled from the island to the city every day, and then again on Sunday. 5 days a week, and then again on Sunday. So we were there. We lived in church, 3 services a day, Friday youth service, Wednesday, prayer, Tuesday prayer, that kind of thing. So my introduction to God was very, very off at a distance. God is out there. We are here.
Mm.
A lot of, I would say, not as legalistic as I'm finding the this region, kind of the Bible Belt, to be, not as rule based as this region, but very fear based, and very us versus them. So whether it was people who practice a homosexual lifestyle, that was the term at that time, or just really just any Muslims, whoever it is, anybody outside of this box, they are outsiders. And we're the elect, and our job is to convert the world, because we're better than everybody. So I grew up with that as my worldview. Although I questioned every minute I could. I specifically, because I would travel with my father early in the morning he would be the one to open the church. It was probably had to be about 5 a.m. Just to get everything ready. This was a huge church, elevators, lights, stages, all those things. So he would open up the church. He would literally physically turn the key. I would be there with him every Sunday morning, and there would be maybe 3 to 4 hours in between that opening and the service actually started. So for about 3 to 4 hours, I would find myself kind of wandering around, within maybe a 10 block radius. The church, there were, Central Park was really close, which is, major park in New York City. I would walk and I wrote poetry. I would find little places to sit down and be inspired. And I kept a lot of those poems. And looking back now, I've dug through them actually not too long ago. And I was always questioning, questioning the behavior of Christians that didn't match up to what I was, hearing from the pulpit, but also questioning this God and saying, this doesn't seem like a loving father. This doesn't seem like someone I would want to spend eternity with. This seems like someone that would, ultimately, I wouldn't even want to date one of my daughters now, So long story short, that was my upbringing. Graduated high school. Immediately after high school, I realized that college was not going to be for me. I did not excel in high school. I probably could have, but, just didn't enjoy, most of what was being taught there either. I guess there's a bit of a rebel in me when it comes to everything. So whether it was school or church, I kind of just didn't really want to conform a whole lot, which, didn't serve me well in some areas, but it's ultimately, I think, led me to a good place. But so right after high school, I joined the Marine Corps. I enlisted, and I served 4 years on active duty, which was, what I would equate to almost an Amish, kind of where an Amish person kind of escapes their religion. They decide to exit their religion, and, they're deprived from all these, maybe worldly, influences, whether it be alcohol, drugs, sex, pornography, whatever it is, all these, things that you're being told are bad, all these things that are, definitely going to send you to hell, kind of thing. I was exposed to that for the first time, and it's not that I didn't know they were there. I had my struggles before that, but now there was no one, looking over my shoulder, also known as my parents, right? No one looking over my shoulder to say, hey, make sure you come home at this time, or don't hang out with these people, or, that kind of thing. So the boundaries had been taken away, and I explored, everything a young man explores at that age. And, where was God, or where was my awareness of God, I should say, because obviously, knowing what we know now, God was obviously, very present. Where was my awareness of God? It was just gone. I had decided that, I was going to just do my own thing. And, this God thing never really made sense to me anyway. Now I don't have to go to church. Now I can, have sex, and I can, go to the nightclub and do all the things that were, a young Marine is going to do with money in their pocket and their car and, all
Mm.
these liberties. So that's what I did. I spent 4 years on active duty and, again, kind of found myself in a situation where, I definitely learned a lot. Again, made some good friends, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't something that I saw myself doing, for 20 years, and that I was going to retire and that kind of thing. So I got out in 2013. I got out of active duty, and immediately pretty much immediately went into college for criminal justice. My plan was going to be something along the lines of law enforcement, whether it was going to be a state trooper or, something like that. At this point, my parents were living in Pennsylvania, Northeast Pennsylvania, which is kind of that tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So I went back with them. And just stop me anytime if I'm rambling here. Otherwise,
Oh,
I'm
you're
just going to
good.
keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah.
Okay,
Well, there was
cool.
a couple questions I
Sure.
had,
Yeah. Go
if I
for it.
can go back just before we get too
Absolutely.
far in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I guess I'm reflecting back to my own journey. Thankfully, I didn't grow up with that heavy emphasis on the end times theology. I
Yep.
did read the Left Behind books, it was there, but it wasn't like such a fear base or such a focus on that. Did that Was that just like an ever present thing in your head? Did you church have like a timeline, like Jesus come back like during this lifetime, or how did
Yeah.
that?
So it was, I think we managed to steer clear from the return of Jesus prophecies. I
Hmm.
think I think we kind of took the approach, no man knows the hour or the
Hmm.
day. However, this pastor, you would just know who he is, David Wilkerson. He wrote The Cross and the Switchblade, Teen Challenge,
I
which
read
is
that
in
book.
Texas.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's a movie, it's a book. I mean, it's a great story. And it was absolutely, started out really, really well. And I think we did steer clear from the Jesus returning, here's when it's
Hmm.
going to happen kind of thing. However, he did prophesy a lot of here's when the world is going to collapse, right? Here's when the
Mm.
apocalypse is going to start. Here's, so Y2K, when we went from 99 to 2000. So that was,
Mm.
when you were supposed to stock up water in your basement and
Mm.
hide
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
everything was going to crash, and, the Christians are going to be forced to take the mark of the beast kind of thing. So, but the role it played personally was, it's scared the crap out of me,
Yeah.
so we're talking about probably 7, 8 years old maybe, and I started having night terrors
Wow.
of, the rapture,
Hmm.
of terrified of Jesus coming back and taking my parents and not taking me because I said a swear word, right?
Hmm.
Or I thought a dirty thought, right? Or whatever it is. So the mindset was ingrained at a young age that this is something to be afraid of. It's kind of like they like to use the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, right? Make sure you have your oil ready, and
Hmm.
it's like, yeah, sure, that's exactly what that means, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I guess that's pretty much how it affected me at a young age. And it was terrifying, so night terrors were a big part of my childhood. I was a scared kid at nighttime. The way I put it were those Left Behind, movies, the Apocalypse, Revelation. There was a number of them. We watched them, and it was Christian horror. It was nothing but
Hmm.
Christian horror. We weren't allowed to watch, I don't know, certain Disney movies, but we were allowed to watch Christian horror, and it just never made sense,
Right.
right?
Right.
You'd be better off watching, I don't know, whatever it was. I can't even think of the movies that were out then, but, we weren't allowed to watch anything except something religious based, even if it was
Hmm.
terrifying and caused trauma. So, yeah.
Right. So, how did you feel after like 2000? When it's like, how did your church handle that? Like, oh, it didn't
Oh
happen.
man, I don't know the inner workings of what was said as far as like, oh, well, I guess we got it wrong. Um,
Hmm.
I do know that there was a lot of, after that, it kind of calmed down a little bit. When that, because it was, it was being predicted every year with every president. Every president was the Antichrist, right? Obama, of course, was the worst of all, right? There were just all these different prophecies of things of calamity. Really, that was the biggest thing. And when nothing ever happened, it for me personally, it made me realize this is just BS.
Right.
We're guessing. And ultimately worse than that, we want, and our theology needs something horrible to happen for Jesus to come back. Right. So we need war in the Middle East. We need this, current right now in 2023, we need that war, Israel and Palestine. We need that because that's what the Bible says has to happen if Jesus is going to come back. Right. So 9/11, I was in 5th grade when that happened. And, like I said, my father was the director of security for the church there at the time, right there in Manhattan. And, there's obviously this human instinct where it's like, oh, this is terrible. But unfortunately, the unfortunate truth is many Christians, your theology needs calamity. It needs war. It needs devastation in order for Jesus to come back, which is just, it's a horrible way to live your life, because how can you pray for peace? How could you possibly pray for peace, right? How could you possibly, who are we praying for, and peace for whom, right? Peace for whom, so that's a whole nother episode probably, but yeah.
That's crazy. That's wild.
Yeah.
And man, I'm so thankful. Like my church growing up, we didn't, you said your church is like 5 days a week nonstop. I could just see how, even from a young age, I would just, you burn out so fast. And there's always that, thing about being like a pastor or elder's kid, and how just that in itself creates rebellion a lot of times. It's funny.
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, absolutely. And I think, I guess I don't want to highlight all the negatives, but however, there were a lot. So, the positives were ultimately the friends that I made, the interpersonal connections that I made. Those are the positives, right? The theology, it's all at this point. I can't think of a single thing that I currently believe now that I believed then, or that was being told to me then, I should say. So the theology is gone. The relationships I had and the diversity, maybe, growing up in the city, the racial and the cultural diversity, leads to an open mind. It leads to a lot of tolerance and a lot of, just exposure to other cultures. My best friends were Nigerian, Dominican, we were all over the place, but as far as growing up an elder's kid or a pastor's kid, or one of those, someone who is, in leadership there, being their son, you're definitely held to a different standard. And there's an expectation that you are going to go into ministry or the mission field, or, something that's going to serve God directly. Right. As they say. And, that's a lot of pressure for a kid, who really just wants to, be able to date and have fun and, maybe go to a party here and there and play football. And, none of that was okay, because that wasn't God stuff. Right. And, so I think a lot of my childhood and adolescence was spent rebelling, because I realized this wasn't for me. This isn't for me, and this isn't what my heart wants, and it doesn't feel right. And that'll probably come up later when we talk about some of the other stuff, but intuition, even at a young age, I have 4 daughters. You can see it now. My oldest she'll be 8. But I have a 1.5-year-old through 8-year-old, and all girls. And, you can see now, especially in the feminine, intuition plays a major role. And my wife and I, we try to, foster that and give them space even at this age to say, hey, like, does that seem right to you? What do you think about that? If we're watching, let's just say Pocahontas, right? Disney movie Pocahontas, and, John Smith and this and that, just whatever. There's some kind of conflict, and you could see their face. They're like, there's something is reacting in their little consciousness there. And we'll pause it and we'll be like, hey, like, how does that make you feel? What do you think about that? And you can see they're like, oh, it's obviously the language is, of a child, but it's there. It's like, no, that's not right. That's not nice. That's not kind, things like that. So, that was there for me as a child and as an adolescent. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's so great that it was just a natural part of who you were. And even through all what you went through, that you never gave that up. And that's probably, like you said, that rebellious part of yourself. And I've always had that as well. I think that helps keep that alive. Whereas some people, they just have that totally like pushed down, and eventually they usually go through a breaking point and have to rediscover that. But it's really hard. Where maybe the transition is a little bit easier for people like us that never had that rebelliousness and never like abandoned that. But that's just so great that you're instilling that in your kids. You're encouraging them, you're asking them, and you're respecting their opinions, their views, and what they think, and having conversation about that. So yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And they enjoy it too. It gives them a sense of, at 4 or 5, there's not a lot of autonomy, right? You don't get to decide when to go to bed or what to eat, really. Within reason, we give them a choice of certain, maybe snacks, but there's not a lot of, individual sovereignty there at 4 and 5. But, I think especially raising them completely outside of religion, and we'll get to that. Raising them outside of these boxes and these dogmas, they need to know who they are, and who they are that's their soul. That's that thing that when everything else is taken from you, that's the thing that remains. Right. And I mean, God, soul, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that's that thing that knows this is right. This is wrong. This doesn't feel good, and that's something we want them to be super sensitive, to. And so I'm sure we'll get there, but yeah,
that's great. So you talked about becoming a Marine after high school and partying, doing all that stuff. Were you I guess during that time, high school, that transition period, do you feel like did you identify as a Christian, and did what you grew up with and those beliefs, were they strong in your mind, and you're just like, I believe this, but it's just too heavy or too hard to handle, so I'm going to try to just push it down and ignore it? Or were you just like, no, I don't believe this, I'm going to do my own thing? How did that kind of play out?
Yeah, I love that question. The first thing, as you were asking that question, there's this verse in James 1, where it says the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And, that was me, and so I would say it's not a yes, I was fully committed, or no. I was, the part of me that was committed out of fear. Like if I abandon this faith, well, I'm definitely going to go to hell, and I don't want to do that, or just simply let my parents down. Right. Or at the time I was, I had a girlfriend that was, going to the same church, and it was like, cause that's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to date, because you're supposed to just, the first person you were attracted to, that's your wife. And it's like, yeah, maybe not, and so there were people that I would have let down, and of course, you don't want to let God down. So I would say there was part of me that for sure identified as a Christian, and even thought I was better, and if I'm being completely honest, there's that, it brings a sense of an air of superiority. Right. And it's like, we have this, it's not even secret knowledge, but we made this decision. And we are, we're just better than you, sorry. And if you make this decision, you can be one of us, so there was that, right. And then there was the part that was like, no, I don't really believe any of this. Because, I think who you are is really, really comes out when nothing else is around you, solitude.
Mm-hmm.
So even as a teenager in high school and stuff, just laying in bed and stuff, and I'd be like, man, this is just not right. This doesn't make any sense. For example, Friday night was youth night, right? It was the youth service. So, you would spend, Monday through Friday in high school. And again, as a young man does, you have struggles common to young men, and things that religion says is bad and you shouldn't do. And there's a lot of shame. I grew up very
Mm-hmm.
ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
I should probably emphasize that there was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of shame present, not even almost every day. Just for behaviors that I knew
Mm-hmm.
were, unacceptable to the church, I guess. And so you'd go Monday through Friday, high school, and then Friday night you're in church. And, of course, guilt comes up because it's like, oh my God, I can't approach this God right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've done this, and
Mm-hmm.
so I would answer an altar call. For most people will know what that is, but essentially it is the pastor. For us, it was a stage. It was a huge stage. Would get up on this stage and says, "Hey, if you need to, excuse me, commit your life to Christ for the first time," they would say, or if you need to recommit your life. So I was recommitting my life to Jesus every single Friday night,
Mm-hmm.
and this is that cycle, of
Right.
delusion that I was in, that I thought that I somehow, lost God during the week because I cursed, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever I did. Um, yeah, so as a high schooler, I would say I was unstable when it came to this religion thing, because part of me said absolutely not. This is crazy, and it's killing me. But part of me also said I can't. If I give it up, I'm going to let a lot of people down.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely had a
yeah,
lot of shame growing up as well. And yeah, yeah. You do things and you're like, oh, I can't be close to God, or He's upset with me, and then I
that's right.
recommit and fall on the good path for a little bit and then go back. It's just a vicious cycle. And yeah, I think that eventually it's just too much to handle, and there's a sort of break. So oh yeah. So did you ever, you're saying like, having all these doubts like this can't be right. Did you ever talk to like your friends or your parents about it, or how did you feel about that?
Man, you're asking some good questions. Um, So it's funny. My wife and I, talk now all the time about. So my wife did not grow up religious. We'll probably get there when we talk about meeting and getting married and stuff. But she did not grow up religious at all. And so she'll ask me questions. The same similar question, like, "Hey, what did your parents teach you about God?" And the funny thing is that um, they didn't. And I think this is common to kids or families who are in church all the time. You leave the teaching and the raising of your child to the church, at least when it comes to God. I'm not
Hmm.
saying they were absent in all things. They definitely weren't. But as far as, did we ever sit down and talk about this stuff? No. I one never felt comfortable questioning out loud. So even talking to my friends, um, I think it was one of those unspoken things where it's like, we know we're all, just figure a bunch of teenage boys, we know we're
Hmm.
all struggling with the same things. We know we're all, as they would say, falling short in the same areas, but no one wants
Hmm.
to say it, right? And it's like, let's just pretend, right? We're going to go to church and we're going to do the thing, and everything is great because we did our religious duty. But it is really important, I guess, to note that as a parent now, and we don't go to a church, so it's important, even if you do go to a church, maybe especially if you go to a church, to have those conversations with your kids and say, hey, like, just probing questions, open and like you're doing with me right now, open-ended questions where it's like, hey, what did you think about, this, or, whatever it is, how did this make you feel?
Hmm.
I enjoy breath work and meditation. It's a major part of my daily I don't know, routine, I guess. And I do that with my children, not with the little one, but we do, it's obviously modified to fit a child, but they go through, now they're not out here doing breath holds or anything like that, but they're doing these deep breaths and they're closing their eyes, and I'm asking them what they see, in the spirit, like in this other realm. What do you see? Where are you going? And sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes it's a field with flowers, who knows? Right. But I'm validating what they're seeing. I'm validating what they're seeing and experiencing. So, and that as a father is going to tell me a lot about where they're at, so if they're, if they're in a dark alley somewhere, that's probably not a good sign. Right. But if they're in a field of flowers and they see, I don't know, whatever, something beautiful and bright, well, that's a good sign that when they close their eyes, something good is happening in their soul. Right. So
you're probing their like psyche. So you're seeing, right. what light is there, what darkness. And
that's right.
It's like if the darkness comes up, of course, it's not good, but it's good that it came up so you can deal with it instead of like you growing up not being able to talk about what was going on inside and just feeling a lot of shame about it and not resolving it all because you just got to keep it hidden because that's not allowed.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, so, for instance, my oldest right now is just entering the dream state, right? Where at, 7 years old, I think I remember that's probably when I started at least remembering my dreams. I believe we dream every night multiple times. We just don't remember. But she's starting to remember her dreams, and, she's had a scary one here or there, and we talk about it. And I love that she trusts my wife and I enough to tell us about it. Right. And to wake up first thing in the morning, still rubbing her eyes. And she's like, I had a bad dream. It's like, okay, great. Let's talk about it. Doesn't have to be a bad thing. It doesn't have to be scary, and it's that, it's the shadow, right? It's that darkness. And, as soon as it gets exposed to light, it's like, yeah, well, I can understand why this is scary. This would scare me too, probably. And, and then, we get to work through it, and, wherever it goes from there is we alchemize it, essentially. Right. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Great. So Marine, just for anybody that, is listening to audio and, they don't see Josiah here. He's a big guy. He's got a lot of muscle. He's got a lot of tattoos. When did that, transformation happen? And what is that significance to you?
Yeah. Wow. So, I think the working out thing, the exercise thing, fitness has always been a part of my life. Even I probably started in 7th or 8th grade. And, to be completely honest, it was just to attract girls at the time, right? To be better looking so you can, be more attractive to the opposite sex or whoever. So that's kind of how it started. Eventually it became a passion because I enjoyed getting stronger and I enjoyed, just the results. It's still a part of my life, just to a different degree now. Now it's a lot more for functionality. The strength may be there still, not like it was. I had competed in strongman and powerlifting and all kinds of stuff before. If we're going there, just very ego based stuff, and I've sustained some injuries from it and all kinds of stuff. But that started in maybe late middle school, early high school. And then, being in the military, it kind of stuck. It's kind of, part of what you have to do. And then, my professions outside of the military have always been like law enforcement / security. So it's always been a physical in your body kind of job. Or lifestyle that I've had. And it's been helpful in a lot of ways because it does help with grounding. It does help with energy regulation. But it can also lead to a lot of, ego stuff. Right. And a lot of negative things that I've worked through. And as far as the tattoos, I think that was just another act out of a rebellion kind of thing. It started with a shoulder tattoo or something that you could hide. And then, and it's funny, the double-minded thing, it's pretty funny. I'll go there. So in the Marine Corps, I had a few, dark experiences with night terrors. This happened,
Mm-hmm.
these things stayed with me all the way through high school, through the Marine Corps, up until about probably 4 years ago. 3 to 4 years ago is when they stopped, and they stopped suddenly on a dime. And I can speak to that later if you'd like. But I was having night terrors, and I equated them to my behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
I assumed that because I was what the church would call sinning, because I was breaking the
Mm-hmm.
religious rules, that the devil, was getting me, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds absolutely ridiculous to me now, but at the time it made a lot of sense. So my first tattoos were actually, I have like a devil figure on this shoulder, and then an angel, like God figure, on this shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally got these tattooed on my body and said, hey, well, I'm just going to embrace my this side and that side. And,
Mm-hmm.
I had split myself into two, right? That there's this good side of me, this part of me that wants really, really wants to please God. And then there's this other
Mm-hmm.
side of me that just can't do it. And it's not that I don't want to, it's just that I can't do it. So those were my first ones. And then it kind of, a lot of them don't mean anything significant to me now. In fact, they're good stories. I have an American flag on my arm, which, I went through a bout of, extreme patriotism, maybe even
Mm-hmm.
nationalism. I'm embarrassed
Mm-hmm.
to say, and
I'm sure that's
struggled with that.
fostered in the Marines.
Oh man, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. And when I had gotten out of the Marine Corps, 2013, it was, the immigration stuff was going on, and there were just a lot of things going on in the country. And, I had found an identity in this, patriotism, and that kind of, guns and flags and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
community. And, it's it's the furthest thing from my heart now, but I literally wear it on my arm, and it's a good conversation piece, because I get to
Mm-hmm.
tell part of that story and how that's not a part of me anymore, and um, there are some others that do mean things to me. I have "Love Wins" tattooed on my hand, and that's my motto in life. And it's ultimately, my theology, if I have any theology at all, which I don't really think I do, is that love, God is love, and love wins. Like, period.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And whatever that
And
means, it
it's for
means.
people that don't know, like Rob Bell's book, Love Wins. I think he was probably the
Yes.
first popular pastor that talked about universalism and causing
Yep.
uproar.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, man. And I've gone way past universalism at this point.
Right.
It was kind of scary. It was scary at one point to come out of the closet and say, hey, we were telling our friends, like, hey, we're universalists. And now
Mm-hmm.
it's like, my goodness, like, that's like, G-rated to the stuff that I believe
Mm-hmm.
now. So yeah. So I think, the tattoos, the working out, all that stuff, this was an expression. The tattoos were more of a rebellious expression. And then some of them, the more visible ones on the neck and the hands and stuff, are who I am now. They speak to a lot more of who I am now, and they do have significance for me. But the fitness has always been there, and I find that it still helps. Even my kids and stuff, they'll run around and just do some exercises with me and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just good for grounding. It's so good for
Right.
the body to
Yeah.
to regulate its energy. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Yep.
think growing up, like exercise and sports was a big thing for me, and especially basketball. And like you said, there's always that ego part, but I
Mhm.
do think it's like, in some ways, that religious upbringing, it's stifling so much, and so that's like an outlet, and like you said, a way to ground and get in the body, and yeah, just getting that flow state and away from the thinking and all the guilt and the shame and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
I totally understand that, and get that. And um, we'll get into your art later, but I can see how your tattoos could be playing into that as well, and a way of expressing yourself and um, understanding yourself, and expressing in a way that you weren't able to express and talk to people when you were younger. So I think that's just interesting there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would agree.
Yeah. So okay, now I interrupted your story. Back to your story. So after high school, you were going into law. Is that right?
Yeah. So after the Marine Corps, I used my GI Bill. The government was going to pay for my education, so I wasn't going to pass up on that. So I went to college for criminal justice. I saw myself going into law enforcement, and to be honest, I didn't really see myself doing anything else because I didn't think I could do anything else. Right.
Mm,
I figured, well, this is what I know. I know how to, shoot a gun and protect people maybe, and whatever, do these things. So this kind of, it seemed like the right path, at that
mm,
time. So during college is when I met my wife, my now wife, and we've been married 8 years. But we walked completely different paths, prior to meeting. My wife is, for anybody who's not seeing this and is just audio, I am white, I am Caucasian, Italian, and some other, random European countries in there.
mm,
My wife is African American and Puerto Rican, so Afro Latina. And so not only do we not look alike, we don't come from similar backgrounds. I was raised in the city. Essentially, she was raised in upstate New York, which is a lot more, suburban, not country, but a little bit more suburban, quiet. Quiet. She comes from a huge family with a dozen siblings. I have one little brother. So there's a lot of differences, different paths that we came from, but we hit it off right away. We connected, and long story short, there's a lot in between there, but dated for a short period of time. I proposed pretty quickly, and we got married within probably, I believe it was like the first year and a half of maybe knowing each other. We
hmm.
were married,
As
and
any good Christian should, right?
that's right. That's right. Oh man, yeah, man. I've got some stories, man. I mean, we moved in together, before we got married. All that stuff. Obviously, slept
So you
together
got to get
before we
married
got
quick,
married.
you know. Hmm.
Yeah, man. You got to. Otherwise, it just makes sense, right? So yeah. So there was a lot of disappointing my parents there, as far as didn't pick a Christian girl, right?
Hmm.
And then of course we made the ultimate sin of moving in together and sleeping together before we got married. All the things you could do wrong, basically, I was doing. I had come out of the Marine Corps with tattoos, and then moved in with a girl who wasn't a Christian. So
Mm,
I was definitely not doing what they thought was right, and
hmm.
that led to a lot of strain in our relationship. I don't want to paint a horrible picture of my parents, because we are right now, for the first time in a long time, like currently, like as we speak right now, we are just reconnecting with
Mm,
them, after a long period of time where we had no contact with them. It was a boundary that we had established, and it was for our own emotional protection, and safety. So, but there was a lot of damage in that relationship, specifically with my father. Mothers are usually fairly, in most cases. This is not obviously a blanket statement, but in most cases, mothers are kind of that unconditional love thing. If you're maternal at all, you're going to love your children unconditionally, no matter what life decisions they make. Fathers are a little bit different, and mine was definitely different. And
mm,
there was a father wound. There was definitely a father wound growing up. Even as a child, everything was poured into the church. All of his attention was poured
hmm.
into the church and people in the church. And I was kind of left. My mother was kind of left to pick up the slack. Where he had dropped the ball, she picked up the slack, and that's not what a young boy needs, right? That's not a young boy eventually needs their father to step up and teach them, how to be a man. I know it sounds kind of cliche and old school, but there are certain things that a boy needs from their father, I believe. And So that was there. And then, getting out of the Marine Corps and stuff, and being, kind of a disappointment to them, mostly to him, put a strain on our relationship even further. And, yeah, that kind of, I guess that could take us almost to present day, where that father wound, that I think I know is present in many. I'm 32, so I'm a millennial. Is present in many people in general. It's present in my own father. His father abandoned him, at birth. He didn't know a father, right? So I have all the empathy and sympathy in the world for him, and I don't judge him. But the facts are the facts, right? And that father wound was passed on. He did better than his dad, thank God. But here we are still, and the father wound that I carried, led me to seek validation from other men, that would be father figures, specifically like pastors, let's just say, or spiritual leaders. In the Marine Corps, it would have been, your superior in the rank structure there. In, law enforcement, it would have been your superior there. So there was always this longing, for validation from a father figure, right? An older, maybe not older, but older than me, male figure. And, that has, it's probably still healing. I wouldn't say that it is healed. It's still healing. It's better than it's ever been. I can face it. I can talk about it openly. And I can talk about it with him. Now for the first time, I can talk about it with him. We're scratching the surface. We're not into the deep stuff yet, but I have a lot of grace for him, and I believe that time does help. And maturity on my end helps a little bit too. To see things differently. So that father wound kind of always stuck there, and I correlate that a lot to God. So what I mean by that is I see, if you take the Trinity approach, the Trinitarian approach to God, which is, God the Father, Jesus the Son, Holy Spirit, which I don't necessarily take the same approach now. But if you did, God would be this father figure, right? There's Father God. And he was always a scary thing. He was always a scary thing, and something that could never be, pleased, right? Something that could never be pleased, or was never really proud of you, that kind of always looked on you with disdain, I guess, and disappointment. At least that's how I felt. And then I had this manifesting 3-dimensionally in my father, who was disappointed in me. So that stuck, and how to transition this to where we are now, I guess, would be the tough part. But long story short, during my wife and I, during our marriage, we had gone in and out of different churches, cycled through religion, basically. So we would in sincerity wanted to be part of a church. We knew that was a missing piece of our life. My wife, maybe not as much as me, because she wasn't raised in the church, but she trusted me enough to know that, hey, this is probably not a bad thing, right? Especially having kids, like, getting them involved in a church kind of thing. How could it be bad, right? So we kind of cycled around through different churches, in our area. Probably within an hour radius, we hit almost every church, different denominations, different, just, everything we could find. Essentially, we would go, and it kind of never scratched that itch for me. I had this deep longing for what I called the real thing. And it was more than just a good show. It was more than just, a good worship session and, some charismatic leader who can deliver a good message. Right. I kind of had an invisible radar for what I called the real thing. And we did not find it in any of our local churches we were living in Pennsylvania as well at that time. We didn't find it anywhere. And, we stuck around with a few for more than a service. We gave a few a chance for a few months, and, everything from a Presbyterian church to a Pentecostal, kind of more charismatic church. And there's some, I guess, pros and cons to each one of them, different preferences, but essentially none of them scratch that itch. Right. Where that kind of leads us to is in 2000 and probably around 2019, 2020, somewhere around there. I discovered a gentleman on YouTube. He calls himself an apostle. And he, I found him through a like a suggested video on YouTube, one of those things you go down the YouTube rabbit hole, and I clicked that video and I listened to him, and what I heard blew my mind. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. And the message was essentially, a lot of it I probably didn't even understand, but something went off in here, inside, and I realized, oh, this is different than anything I've ever heard before. So let me investigate further, kind of thing. Because I had, at that point, we had cycled through another church and kind of had just given up. So I heard this gentleman. I went to that rabbit hole of podcasts and YouTube videos, and started hearing what I believed was the gospel for the first time, right? The good news for the first time, that God, the Father, is just like Jesus, right? When Jesus says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. That was kind of like the crux of this gentleman's message, which is it's a good message. It's not a bad message. And for someone who dealt with father wounds, for someone who was lived in this place of fear of that father God, but I could look at the life of Jesus and say, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like I can get with that. But the other guy, in the Old Testament doesn't seem that cool. When I heard that message for the first time, it resonated. It resonated with me, and it started, I think, correcting things in my view of God, in my relationship to God. And at that point, I had introduced my wife to this gentleman, not, personally, but I showed her some of the videos and stuff. And she didn't really understand it, if I'm being honest, again, because she doesn't have the same background I have. But she was like, well, if this is bringing you peace, if this is bringing you some kind of fulfillment, then great. Like, keep going. Right. And so I had her full support to dive headfirst into this stuff. And eventually, pretty much had listened to everything that was out there that this guy had said. And if anybody does know or doesn't know this gentleman, he's very charismatic. He's an amazing orator. He's an amazing speaker, brilliant teacher, and very charismatic. It's very likable personality, and there's something. There was something drawing about that personality. So fast forward a little bit, my wife and I, my family, at the time, we had, at this point we had 3 children, and I think my wife was pregnant with our 4th. And, we had decided that what was happening internally in me, what was happening in my interior world, was such a big deal, and it was changing things around us for the better, that, it was probably a good idea if we maybe take a visit to this church. This church was down south. The church was South Carolina. But we actually found now they call them spiritual sons. We found a spiritual son of his, in this area where we live now in Georgia, the Atlanta region. And we decided to take a trip down here to visit that church. We had been live streaming with them for a little bit. We had been tracking with them, and just really, really enjoying what we were hearing. Really thought that it was good and it was true and it felt right. So we took that trip. We came down here to Georgia. We visited the church, and we liked what we saw. From the surface, everything. We obviously hadn't moved down here at that point. We did one service for a couple hours and went back home, and we liked what we saw. We connected with a couple of the people, and it felt different. It felt completely different than anything I'd ever been a part of. It was small. It was very small, 50 people at most, very close, very intimate, not a big building, like a little room kind of thing. Very, as they say, like family oriented kind of. And in fact, they call themselves, a family. They call themselves a kingdom family, is the language. And I'm using the language that they use only because, we're going to get there, and that's kind of what I'm leading up to now. But essentially, we don't go to this church anymore. And this story is kind of leading up to the how it came to be, right. Essentially, that we exited that church. Is this making sense so far?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So we after we had visited, we went back home to Pennsylvania, and I'm an all or nothing type of person. So I secretly already had wanted to move here, and be a part of this, religion, spirituality, Christianity, whatever you want to call it. Cause this was a Christian church. They're not a denominational church, but they believe all the things that most, non-denominational kind of Christian churches would believe. It was important enough to me that I pitched the idea to my wife and said, hey, what would you think about uprooting our lives and moving down south to Georgia, somewhere where we really have, no family or connections. And, it was a conversation for a while, and, eventually eventually we agreed. And we had visited a couple more times this church. We had taken the drive down here a couple more times. And we decided that it was what we wanted to do. We believed that we were supposed to move here. We believed for sure that God, air quotes, I'm going to do air quotes, on God was leading us here. And we moved, I had a full-time job, a great job. My wife had a great job that she was at for over 10 years. We had children that were in daycare and in one that was in the school system at the time. We owned a home. We had a good life. We had a good life. And we pretty much sold or threw out everything, packed what little we had left into a small U-Haul. My wife drove the minivan. I drove the U-Haul, and we moved to Georgia. And that is where I am now. So I'm gonna tread cautiously on how I speak of what happened after that, only because I don't want to say anything that's untrue or paint a picture that's worse than it is, but I also want to remain true to what I believe is true. So, I guess the thing that where we are now is this church that we joined. At a certain point, we realized that it is a cult. It has cult-like tendencies. I believe the leader is, it's a tough situation to be in, because I don't think that a lot of what's being said and done is intentional. However, this is a cult, what we joined, and we didn't realize that before we moved, obviously. However, we started seeing a lot of red flags. Once we moved, and what they say is once we quote unquote got joined, which is essentially, it's a very vague term that they use, because it's not so much signing a document as you would say, in most churches, if you become a church member, you have to sign something, or there's some kind of, ritual that takes place. There's none of that. It's more of a ambiguous, thing they use to say about people who move here or are deeply connected to people, and things of that nature. So one of the main messages of this church is the importance, and not just importance, but necessity of spiritual fathers and mothers, but specifically spiritual fathers in your life. Which on the surface doesn't sound horrible. However, it's vague what that means. And for us, I can speak to our experience. We did end up having a spiritual mother and father. We, as they say, came like under submission. It's hard for me to say these things because a lot of these words are just, they just don't even feel good coming out of my mouth, to be honest. Right. But we submitted to this woman and this man, who were our spiritual parents. And there was a good amount of, manipulation, and a good amount of control and when I say good, I mean, it obviously wasn't good, but there was a lot of manipulation and control, in these relationships, and they're relationships that this leader says are crucial to Christianity. So one of the messages currently is that you cannot be a true Christian, if you're not joined, quote unquote, to a body of believers. So, I mean, I think that's, to anyone who really uses any kind of, logic or critical thinking, that just doesn't even make any sense. But it's a control tactic, right? It's a control tactic, and it's a form of manipulation to, bring people under this umbrella, as they call it. So, so we started seeing these red flags pretty early. And when I say we, mostly my wife, being intuitive, she saw a lot of these red flags. It's not that I didn't see them, because I did. However, I was hopeful that they would either change, or I was hopeful that I was just seeing them incorrectly, right? That it was like, something's off about me. Like, I'm not seeing this right, kind of thing. But again, that intuition. So we were seeing these red flags, financial stuff, there would always be a new offering. There would always be a new call to giving. We were encouraged to give it all. We were encouraged to pretty much give all of our money away, and not just me and my wife, like the whole group of people. They speak of they call it the Acts 2 blueprint, which is basically this idea of the early church, the early Christian church in Acts 2, that they want to kind of return to that, which is, if you know anything about Acts 2, it's a lot of, selling everything you have and sharing it with each other, kind of thing. So they have this dream of kind of having a property, living, self-sustained and contained, and it, kind of just sharing everything. And, I'm painting a picture of what sounds like a cult, and what sounds, potentially dangerous. There's a lot of, bashing other churches, bashing other, communities. We are, it's essentially, we are, I mean, it's never said this way directly, but what we're teaching is the truth, and these other things are not, right? So with that said, eventually these red flags became so blatant and obvious to me, and not just my wife, that I couldn't ignore it anymore. And there came a point where there was a catalyst. So something happened, and that thing that happened was the church, the building that we were meeting in, there was a fire. in that church. When the church was closed, it was the middle of the night. There was a fire, and we were connected to like a whole building. There were multiple rooms and multiple buildings connected, so it wasn't just this building. But it had completely displaced the building, so we had nowhere to meet essentially. And that was something that for me kind of sent me into a place to look in the mirror and say, okay, maybe it's time to wake up and realize that you're giving your power away. You're giving all of your power away. You're literally giving your money away. You're giving your time away. We would spend, 4 hours on a Sunday morning in church, and then be asked to come back, that night, for another however long, so, and with 4 kids, that's hard to do. So we were just giving everything away, all of our resources, basically, time, money, energy, all these things. And, it had come to a breaking point for me where I sat alone with myself in solitude. I was given, fortunately, I had the opportunity to have some time to, really not be alone without my family, but be in a place of solitude. And I was able to think, and I was able to go inward. And, I had realized that this thing that we're a part of is not what we thought it was. And I had realized that I had got my family into a situation where we were being spiritually abused, and manipulated. And, I had, pretty much at that point had a conversation with my wife, and we talked, and we decided the best thing to do was to cut ties, and to disconnect, and to just officially kind of say, hey, listen, like we don't want to be a part of this anymore. And that's that. And, since then, things for us have been amazing. And that was a part of, the main reason I bring this up is because it's part of my journey that was a catalyst to an awakening. Being able to shut down the noise of religion, to be able to shut down the noise of the church and the all of the things that are distractions, essentially, that put me in this place of silence and solitude where an awakening happened. And, out of that came art, out of that came poetry, out of that came a lot of creativity and things that were dormant in me for years and years. So I guess I'm gonna stop there. I said a lot, and I'm gonna just go ahead and hand it over to you. So I apologize that I just rambled for about 20 minutes.
No, that was great. I appreciate that. Thank you for being so vulnerable and honest. It's obviously not easy to go through or even recap, so appreciate that. I want to go back to earlier when you're talking about your parents and your dad and then his dad, and I think you're just speaking to generational trauma and recognizing that. I mean, I think it's something that everyone experiences. That there's things passed on, and there's good things and there's bad things, and we just have to obviously, take what we get and decide what we're going to do with it. And so it's great that we can recognize the shortcomings and, in a way, have empathy for our parents and grandparents or whoever, and seeing how they were dealing with the same kind of things. And so, they're doing their best. And also recognizing that can help us, I think, take accountability for it and how it plays out in our own lives, and then learn to heal that as best we can, and hopefully do the best we can to not pass that on to our kids in the future. So
Yep.
And also,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and then also you're talking about how your image of God was so reflected. And I've said this before, just often our parent wounds are reflected on our image of God. And it's great once we can recognize that and then be like, okay, well, who is God actually? And not that, and see a more correct image rather than just like reflecting this wound. Um, yeah. So I'm curious. That church. Do you think it was your church plant that was a cult, or was it the whole um, church organization overall?
Hmm. Yeah, again, something, man, it's great. I love your questions, first of all. Really good questions. And they're all things, it's funny because they're all things that I have thought about. And some of them I don't even have, I haven't come to the conclusion on myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I, I think it's safe to say that overall, I don't believe, um, the organization as a whole, because there are
Mm-hmm.
multiple church plants that come
Right.
from this one, air quotes apostle,
Mm-hmm.
that come from him. There are multiple ones. I believe the one that we specifically joined has has gone the route of has gone a dangerous route, I will say.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think overall the whole thing is a cult. I don't think the goal and the aim of it is for control and manipulation. However, I do
Mm-hmm.
think that the the one that we are a part of has gone that route, unfortunately, and I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it happened overnight. When we visited, it wasn't. Maybe we didn't see it as much because we didn't live here. That's very
Mm-hmm.
possible. However, a lot has changed in just a short period of time that we were here, and prior to us moving here. A lot of the messages, a lot of the teaching, a lot of the things have changed, and it went a direction that is far too controlling and yeah, just cult like for us. So
Mm-hmm. Right.
yeah.
Right. And I mean, you're basically saying, that parent wound kind of led you to some blindness and some
Hmm.
vulnerability to be easily taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, no, I thought, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, that need for validation, especially from a male father figure, and marry that to the emphasis of you need a spiritual father in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you'll never be whole. You'll
Right.
never be a complete, they would say the fullest expression of who you could be, right? That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
the language. So unless you have the family around you and a spiritual authority in your life, i.e., a spiritual father, you're never going to be the fullest expression of who you could be.
Mm-hmm.
Which you could say aligned, whole, complete, whatever
Mm-hmm.
language. But yeah, I think that wound in me left me open and vulnerable, as you said, to that kind of message, that kind of you know. It's like, oh yeah, that's me. That's me. I need
Mm-hmm.
a father. So, and this person is willing to be my father, and this person is
Mm-hmm.
willing to fill that role in my life. And it's also important to note too that there was never any encouragement. We came here completely cut off from my family, and my parents, and I came here with a lot of hurt and probably a lot of anger towards my father, and hurt was at the bottom of that anger. Pain was at the bottom of that. But we were never encouraged to, um, to heal that relationship. I was never encouraged to heal or to even pray or seek healing in that relationship. It was kind of like, well, this is your new father now, right? This is, it was never said directly, hey, this person is replacing this person. But, I had openly spoke of my father wound, and there was a lot of, well, you're here now and you're safe and everything is going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, almost as soon as we left this church, we disconnected, the door just miraculously opened for me to heal my relationship with my biological father, with my actual
Wow.
father.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah, I was
something
gonna ask, and you're already
yeah,
talking about like how did you start healing, and
right.
how did you salvage also your own faith and belief in God?
Yeah. Um, so, so the first part would be, as far as my father goes, when we had cut ties with this church, I something in me said eventually, after maybe a month or two of really alchemizing a lot of the stuff, the pain and the trauma from this church, and rediscovering, personal individual sovereignty, rediscovering the God in me. We'll get to some of that stuff, but after going inward and doing this inner work, it just kind of came natural. And I said to my wife one day, I was like, what do you think would happen if I reached out to my parents? Like, you think that, how do you think that would go? And, it's hard to speculate. So we were like, what's the worst that happens? We don't have a relationship now with them. The worst that can happen is they ignore us, or, they say kick rocks, like, or the best that could happen is we actually have a relationship and my children get to meet their grandparents. Right. So I think I just shot them a text. I put my mom and my dad in a group text, shot them a text, and I set the intention, and I made it very clear. And I said, hey, listen, we love you guys. Where we'd like to reconnect primarily for the kids, primarily for the kids. We don't have to, no pressure on talking about all this stuff right away. And like, basically no pressure that we have to like jump right into this healing process. Mm-hmm. And there needs to be like a 4-hour deep therapy conversation. Like, let's just see what happens. Let's open the door and see what happens naturally. And we have, we Zoom with them, once a week, and the kids talk to them for a little bit. And then just naturally, everybody kind of just fades away, and me and my dad are left like this, and we're just talking, and he's opening up about his wounds, and he's like, son, I don't know if you knew this, but whatever, this thing. And I'm like, no, I had no idea, that happened to you. I had no idea this was a part of your life. That's a part of my life. My parents were a part of a cult, when they were younger. And it was a short, my dad met my mother, in that church, but it ended up being a cult where the pastor was actually, sexually perverse there. And they had to leave because of that. And, so there's these things that are just coming to the surface. Right. And it's like, man, we're doing this, without even trying, just naturally stepping away from religion, stepping away from dogma and doctrine, and stepping into individual sovereignty and doing this inner work. Healing is just coming as a byproduct. Healing relationships, relationships that actually matter and will be there your whole life. Right. So, so that is how that happened. I guess the other question you asked was about how to, how did I kind of hold on to my faith? Was that the question?
Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm.
That's tough, man. That's a loaded question. That's a loaded question. I guess the best way to answer that is, deconstruction is a popular word these days, right? And I think it gets thrown around like the word new age, like the word spiritual. There's a lot of these just clickbaity kind of words that get thrown around, and I don't think people know what they mean, and maybe I don't know what it means. But I think what, I actually made a post today on Instagram, and I basically said that it's something along the lines of walk boldly into the fire. The fire will not consume you, but it will consume everything you are not. And that's kind of a poetic way of talking about deconstruction, right? It's if the way I see it is, let all of this stuff die, and whatever remains is going to be God, is going to be consciousness, is going to be the real you. And that's what I did, so stepping away physically from, a group of people that were toxic for us, but also stepping away mentally in my consciousness and saying, I've never asked some of these questions that I need to ask. So I studied things, just some real basic things like church history, some real basic things that woke me up big time. They were alarming to me. We can get into some of them if you'd like, but long story short, I let everything die. I let all the things that I held on to die, all my images of God, all my ideas of God, all my ideas of church, of all my ideas of myself.
Mm,
This is who you are, this is what you believe, right? Otherwise, you're not a Christian, right? And the thing
mm,
is, I'm not. I boldly say I'm not a Christian, and I don't mean that hatefully. I don't mean that, to speak poorly of anybody who is a Christian, but I can't identify with one thing, and maybe that will change eventually, but right now this is where I'm at. And
mm,
I'll just give you one example. So I think Christians, but any religion, really any religion, there's fundamentals of that religion that
mm,
this is something we believe, and this is orthodox, right? And if you don't believe this, if you step outside of orthodoxy, well, then you
mm.
can't really call, you're not a Christian. You're not this thing, this
Right.
imaginary thing anymore, because it's really not. What is it, right? So that's what I found happening. So the example I'll just give, just for one example, is the idea of, you've probably heard of this, of Jesus in India, right?
Mm, right.
So not just, many people will speculate and agree on Jesus, maybe, before he steps on the scene as a 30-year-old, right? Before the Behold
Mm,
the Lamb of God scene. We know he was in Egypt. That's right there in black and white in the Bible and in other documents. But the India thing, people will speculate. They'll say, okay, maybe he went to India before that. But what about after, right? What about, maybe he didn't just die and then raise from the dead and then ascend? Maybe there was something else going on, right? And there's a whole I don't even want to call it a belief, but there's this whole idea. And it's, again, it's an idea. I don't know if I believe it or not, but it's this idea that possibly Jesus didn't in fact die, that he was actually slipped away and taken to
mm,
India and survived in India. There's a grave site and a tombstone in India, and they call him Prophet Isa, and they admit that that's Jesus, right? The Prophet Jesus and all this stuff. So long story short, without going into the details, it's like, well, if you don't believe that Jesus actually died and actually raised from the dead and
mm,
actually ascended, well, you're not a Christian. You're outside of Orthodox. So for me, it's easy for me to say, well, I'm not a Christian then. Like, if that's the definition, right, then I'm not that.
mm, mm,
Because there's a lot of things I believe, or at least explore at a
mm.
minimum, that are outside of Orthodox. So maybe hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. My roommate and I were talking the other day about, the labels and Christian or not. And um, I think it just depends on the person. I think some people are like, "Oh, I'm Christian because I follow Jesus," and then some are like, I'm a Christian because of, like you said, this orthodoxy and this. I believe this, and this, and this. And if you don't believe that, then you're outside of Christianity. And um, I, I agree with you, actually. I agree. I identify more as a mystic, and
Yep.
if someone is gonna be like, well, if you don't believe this and this, or if you're exploring this possibility, this belief, then you can be Christian. I'm just like, what's the point of fighting? What's
Right.
I don't
That's
think
right.
the labels I don't think are important to God. To other people, they are, and obviously, it is going to affect your relationship. But I think the 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 true relationships are the ones that are going to look past labels and figure out what do you actually believe and why, and how does that affect your life, and that's what's most important, um, rather than just the your mind and your theology. Uh, yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, no, and I think, something came to mind. We have a common Instagram friend. I don't know him in real life, but Spoken Logos, he goes by on Instagram, Brett.
Mm-hmm.
He had posted something the other day maybe about a week or so ago, and it was a picture of, it says, "Not all who wander are lost," right? And there was a caption. His
Mm-hmm.
caption under there spoke to basically these identities that are falling off of him. I don't want to misquote him,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not going to try to quote it. But generally, it spoke to this idea of just different identities that he had identified with, different labels, whether it be mystic, whether it be Christian, whether it be
Mm-hmm.
author, whatever it is. And I think, it's something along the lines of these things are just falling off, and it's like the safest place to be. It's the best place
Mm-hmm.
to be. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where I find myself now. It's like, I don't want to plant my flag really anywhere because, expansion, right? We have to expand, we have to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
think it's okay to say you believe something. I'm not saying there's no truth. Of course there's truth, but that truth is it's mobile, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not static, right? It's like a
Right.
river, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't just stop somewhere and say, okay, this is truth, now you can stop here and stay there and hang out with truth. It's like, no, truth is a journey, and it's a
Mm-hmm. Right.
realization. And the I think one of the most important things that I've learned, or maybe I've unlearned, during this journey is the reality of Christ, right? Christ consciousness. Again, that's another kind of word or that's thrown around a lot. And again, I'll say, maybe I don't know what it means. Maybe no one knows what it means, or maybe it means different things.
Mm-hmm.
But what it means to me and what I've discovered is, being able to separate the person, the man of Jesus, the person of Jesus, with the consciousness of the Christ. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of opinions on this. And, I was actually told that if I continued on the journey I'd be on, that I would denounce Christ, or I would denounce Jesus. I'm sorry, I would denounce
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, and I'd be a heretic, basically. And
Mm-hmm.
here I am, what would seem like I'm denouncing Jesus. But I want to say that the beauty of it is discovering that it's actually not about Jesus, right? And I say that with confidence, and I say that with love for Jesus. I say that with love, and I believe, I'm a firm believer in the ancestors, in the Bible calls them the cloud of witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have transitioned, right? Dead people, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
who can guide you in the spirit. I've had those
Mm-hmm.
experiences. I currently have them, and I believe that is one way that Jesus, the man, still guides
Mm-hmm.
people to this day. Something along those lines. Obviously, the teachings are amazing. The teachings, I mean, they're my favorite teachings still, but they're not the
Mm-hmm.
only. They're not the only. And being able to understand Jesus, the man, being different than Christ, the consciousness, was important for me, because if Jesus is the thing, well, Jesus is not is it's a different thing when you understand the consciousness is in you, that the spirit, the thing that can't be named, the thing that really can't be even touched, is in you, and is not just in you, but is in everyone, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
Apostle Paul has probably my favorite quote unquote definition of God, when he's I think it's Acts 17, I believe, where he's in Athens, and he's speaking to the Greek philosophers and Stoics and poets, and
Mm-hmm.
he's basically he notices all
Talking about the unknown
their
God.
that's right. He notices all their shrines and their
Right.
architecture, and he's right. And it's amazing because, you know, he doesn't diminish or bash them for their
Mm-hmm.
idols. He actually
Mm-hmm.
compliments them, and he says, I notice, again, this is the paraphrase, go read it for yourself, but it's the paraphrase. I notice that you're really devoted and you're really religious. And I
Mm-hmm.
notice all your
Right.
architecture. It's to me, it reads like a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
And I even notice you're so devoted that you have a statue to the unknown God. You know,
Mm-hmm.
could I introduce you to him? Right. And then he
Mm-hmm.
says something beautiful, and he quotes, he goes into this thing about how we're all the offspring of this God, and we're
Mm-hmm.
all, sons and daughters, children of this God. And he says, even as one of your poets says, in him we live and move and have our being. A
Mm-hmm.
poem about
Yeah.
Zeus, a Greek poem about Zeus. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's many Christians would say, the Apostle Paul that's our guy, right? Like, that's our guy. And
Mm-hmm.
well, if that's your guy, then, we're going to have to really figure out how to be tolerant of other cultures and how to be inclusive of other cultures, and say, maybe they're not just idolaters. Maybe they're not just, out here, whatever is said about other people. Maybe there's something unique and common that we all have.
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
and that's what I've been finding on this journey. I'll shut up and I'll let you respond to any of that if you want.
No, that's great. I love that. That's fun. I didn't even remember that in him we move and have our like. I love that verse, but that it was originally attributed to Zeus.
That's right.
So
Yep. Yeah.
that's funny. Because that's definitely one
Yeah.
of my favorite verses as well. Um, and yeah, I think one of the joys I've had in my own spiritual journey is exploring different religions and belief systems, and finding that commonality, um, and that deep truth within all religions. And of course, there's things I disagree with in every religion, but there is that truth that runs through it all. And I think that's what the mystics discovered, and they weren't so caught up in the theology and the dogmatism. And like you said, I think truth, I can say the fruits of the spirit, like love, joy, peace. I think most people can agree with these things, but how they play out in our life, that's always changing. Our life is always changing when the context and what that means, and still different theology. Like I there's lots of things I don't understand, or I might have a certain belief system, but I know that that's not the ultimate thing. That I'm always discovering better ways of understanding or better language to talk about it. But I know it's not the thing itself, and so I'm more focused on that relationship with God, and living it out. But it's fun to explore, as long as we can try to stay away from the dogmatism and be like, it has to be this way, or you have to say it this way.
That's
So
right.
so yeah, I think that's great, and that's beautiful. So I appreciate your journey. Um, what practices do you do that you found helpful for your spiritual journey?
Hmm. Hmm. So, as far as practices go, I guess the part of the catalyst, part of the catalyst for this awakening was breath work. I find a lot of clarity. I find a lot of peace. And I also find it's a bridge for me. Breath work is a bridge, door, gateway, portal.
Mm-hmm.
Lot of different terms I might use interchangeably for it, but it's a bridge for me. Occasionally, it's been a catalyst for encounters that I can't really explain. Things that happen that I still don't understand, but I know I come out of them different. And I know that
Mm-hmm.
when I'm on the other side of them, there is three-dimensional evidence of something otherworldly happening. And if there's something with Paul, since we were talking about him before, that I'd like to bring up in this, where Paul. I don't know where it is, so someone's just going to have to Google it. But when he's speaking to a church, it's one of the letters to the churches, and he's basically saying that he doesn't want to brag. He wants to be humble, but he's
Mm-hmm.
gonna. I knew a man, he says, I knew a
Mm-hmm.
man once who, and it's not very, it's obvious
So
he's
subtle.
talking about himself. Yeah, not very subtle. Exactly. It's like, hey, I knew this guy once. Yeah, Paul, it's you. He says, I knew a man who was caught up to, I think he says the third heaven, or
Yes.
one of the heavens. I knew a man who was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. And then he kind of talks about this experience that he had, and there's there's an interesting thing that is that things that have happened along this journey. Now I don't believe in seeking encounter. I don't believe in seeking mystical experiences, although I love them when they happen. But it's usually when I'm not seeking it that it actually happens more.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the
When you're
amazing
seeking, a
thing.
lot of times it stops you from having it because you're like, I want the experience to be like this, and then
Right.
you're fighting what could be.
That's right. Surrender really is the key.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not encouraging anybody to seek a mystical experience, or hey, if you go do this breath work, that you're gonna all of a sudden get caught up to the third heaven. But by no means am I saying that. But you
Mm-hmm.
might, and that would
Right.
be amazing if you do. But you might just come out with more peace, and you might come out happy and fulfilled, and you might realize that you had things to be grateful for, and you might come out with a feeling of abundance. And these are all things that it does for me. So breath work is probably the number one thing, practice that I find helpful for me, which goes hand in hand with meditation. So specifically breath work slash meditation, I would put in that, because it
Mm-hmm.
kind of goes hand in hand. I still kind of, like we opened up with prayer. At the beginning of this conversation, I still pray. Kind of like you said, I don't know how to. I don't, and it changes. There's been times where it feels like channeling my own soul, and
Mm-hmm.
and you could almost call it like an affirmation or a mantra, where
Mm-hmm.
I'll almost say something. It is me, but it's not the egoic me, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not coming from my head. It's coming from somewhere deeper than that. And it'll be something like, gosh, I don't know. So the other day, something came up, and I, wasn't feeling the best, not physically, but just in a mental space that was like, yeah, I could probably benefit from some breath work right now, meditation. And I went through that actual ritual, and then I just sat there in silence, and then something kind of just bubbled up, and I said, I am much loved, and I have much to love. And that's not how I speak. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not something that I would naturally say.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that come from? I can't tell you if it comes down from a third heaven, or it comes from. I think it comes more from within. I think it comes more from a
Right.
consciousness that is beyond close to us. That is closer than close.
Mm-hmm.
And I think is a silence is an avenue that it makes it wide open. This
Mm-hmm.
thing, this consciousness, Christ, God, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to compete. It's not going to compete with other voices, and it's not the idea of, hey, just you can force yourself into silence, because again, it's like seeking a mystical encounter. The more you try to make silence happen, the louder the
Right.
intrusive voices are going to be. It's more of just
Mm-hmm.
for me personally, I'll surrender to the voices. I'll actually acknowledge it, and then
Mm-hmm.
I'll almost be kind to it and say, okay, like, I hear you, not right now
Mm-hmm.
though. And that sounds
Right.
kind of crazy, but even if it's like,
I mean,
for
like making a
example,
pact with them, like,
that's
I
right.
okay, I'll listen to you a little bit, and then be like,
Yep.
okay, we'll deal with you after this, and actually this meditation or whatever right now will help me be in a good place to deal with you, and deal with that in a good way after this.
That's right, because those voices aren't going to go away forever either. And I think
Right.
that's part of, we're getting a little off course, but that's fine. That's part of a struggle I think people have with the spiritual journey, especially ones who are really into like the meditative practices, more of the Eastern kind of
Mm-hmm.
practices where it's like, being very Zen and being very, namaste kind of stuff. And I love
Mm-hmm.
that. That's very attractive to me. It's something that I resonate with big time. But you can't live there forever. It's not something I don't
Mm-hmm.
think anybody can live there. And, even if we look at the life of Jesus, right, we have, these big shining, moments, the Mount of Transfiguration, these healing miracles. And then it's like, and Jesus oftentimes retreated into the wilderness to be alone. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what was he
Mm-hmm.
doing? Right. What do you think he was doing? I don't know, but I would imagine something like this,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so those voices aren't going to go away either. And I think that's something to be, to remember when we meditate or do breath work or pray, as a Christian, and I can speak to Christians because, I get it. I did this for 30 years, 31 years. There's a lot of guilt and shame when you say, okay, I'm going to use Christian language here for a second. When you go into
Mm-hmm.
the prayer closet, right? When you go into the prayer closet or you have your devotion time and you're supposed to be God time and you're supposed to be praying and reading your Bible and doing the thing. And then all of a sudden you get an intrusive thought and you feel guilty. And you're like, oh man, like this is supposed to be God's time. And you beat yourself up. That's no different than, someone sitting down and wanting to meditate and having an intrusive thought, and then you beat yourself up. It's shame. Shame speaks,
Mm-hmm.
all languages, and it's multilingual, I guess. And the thing is that voice it's okay, So let's just say, for example, if I sit down to go pray or meditate, and the intrusive voice is, did you pay that bill? Did you pay your cable bill this month? It's like, oh dang, did I? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's not that is not important. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, I will deal with this in a minute. I'm going to acknowledge you. I recognize you. I'm not suppressing that. I'm not going to try to force it back down because that's not going to work. I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm done here, we're going to deal with that.
Right.
Thank you. And
And
be
really,
kind to it.
yeah, yeah, and it's creating a habit of space between our stimulus and response. So anytime that life happens and it's hard and we have an emotional reaction or anxiety, whatever, instead of just responding automatically and get caught up in that and responding in a bad way, can like take some space, like let me set it down a little bit, examine this. What is the thoughts behind it? What is the appropriate way to respond?
That's right. Yep, absolutely. So beyond breathwork, meditation, prayer, I would kind of lump all of them into one kind of category
Mm-hmm.
because they all kind of happen
Right.
at the same time. I guess how you kind of how we met. So I have this art page on Instagram. It's kind of evolved over the past year or so. Initially, it was an outlet, or just a creative outlet, because I didn't see myself as an artist. So I was like, well, you know what? Let me do what everybody else is doing and jump on the AI train and see if I can make
Mm-hmm.
something cool and just express these. Really, if I'm being completely honest, it was a way to put into three-dimensional, well, I guess two-dimensional, but it was a way to put into image these encounters
Mm-hmm.
that I was having, these mystical experiences that I was having.
Mm-hmm.
It was a way to represent them, and that's how it started, and it was helpful, and it kind of opened up the door for what probably the most, maybe second most beneficial practice for me is, which is drawing sacred geometry.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I guess, kind of what the page has turned into now. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's got many personalities, but
Uh-huh.
sacred geometry, I just discovered from the rabbit hole of synchronicities, right? So one thing led to another. In this awakening, in this search, I think the kind of the way it happened was eventually numerology came up and certain other patterns, throughout creation. So whether it's numerology or, I think I was researching the pyramids a little bit, and there were some, there's some certain shapes and some certain numbers that correlate to the circumference of the earth. And there's all these correlations. Right. And I, eventually got introduced to, sacred geometry and, Metatron's cube, the Merkaba, these are all different things you can Google. They're represented by shapes, multiple shapes intersecting. And they are also, that some of them can't be represented 3-dimensionally. So we only have 2-dimensional figures. So for instance, the like the Tesseract, right? So that's something that's really, really popular if you're exactly. So if you're a Marvel fan, you know what the Tesseract is. I'm a huge Marvel fan. And you know what it is, but it's 4-dimensional. It can't be represented. We don't know what that is, right? We can think about it, but we don't know what it is. So sacred geometry is for me, it's a resource. It's an expression. It's a meditative experience for me. And it has led me down an interesting path of discovery, self-discovery. I can get into if you want me to really go down the rabbit hole, I can get into something if you'd like me to.
Yeah, definitely. Before you do that, I just want to say a little bit about sacred geometry.
Sure.
It's funny, in junior high, I just had a classmate who was like, "Oh, I do these doodles," and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." So I started doing it, and ever since I've been doodling. And then on my spiritual journey, I was like, "Oh, there's this thing called sacred geometry." I was like, "Oh, I've been kind of doing that on my own since I was in junior high. Before, I didn't even know what that was." And kind of going into or learning more about it. Yeah, so the Greeks were into these platonic solids, just these different shapes that were in creation and many different things, whether that was trees or clouds or molecular structures, all this stuff, and that you see that repeating in fractal patterns throughout creation. And so it's just another expression and understanding of truth and the patterns of the universe, really. And I think there's something so beautiful that helps connect our right and left hemisphere, our brain, that the intuitive and but also the logical. And I don't know why, but it's just there's something about it that's magical, and that's helpful for our brain to connect and to get beyond words and to see like an image and these repeated patterns. And to me, when I do this sometimes, and I'll see it on your page too, you'll write some reflected wisdom, and that happens to me when I'm drawing. I'm like, oh, this makes me think of this, or this reflected pattern makes me think of a truth. I don't know if is that kind of how it happens with you?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, to just kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, it's for sure the way it happens. I try not to, kind of like meditation, I try not to make it anything while it's happening.
Right.
And when the experience is over, so whether that's when the drawing is, I'm happy it's done, or whether the meditation is done and it's time to open your eyes and, get back to life. Usually that's when at some point after that, something like, you could call it a download, you can call it whatever you want. Some kind of wisdom, some kind of knowledge or understanding, comes to you or comes to me. And, as far as geometry goes, sacred geometry, I had mentioned earlier about high school. I was not, good at math. I was never, interested in art even. I've always liked tattoos, but I never saw myself as an artist. And in finding, similar to like what you were saying, first thing I found before the drawings and the platonic solids and, the actual representation, I found these synchronicities in nature. I didn't find them, but I discovered that someone else was teaching about these.
Right.
And it's kind of like, it's like, when you see it in everything. You can't unsee it, right?
Right.
It's like the same thing as being able to find the Christ in all people and in all things. When you see these patterns, they repeat.
Oneness.
It's all oneness, and it's all and ironically, it's all about connection. And the interesting thing is, everything comes from, when now I guess I'm speaking esoterically, but I'm also speaking just practically. When you're drawing, everything comes from a dot, from one. That pencil
Mm,
has to hit the paper
mm-hmm.
at some point and make a dot. Like it can't, even a line or a circle at first, it's just a dot, right?
Right.
And I don't know what to make of that, other than there is something fundamentally at the core of the most intricate things. So even, whether it's the most intricate drawing or the most intricate, you split open a tree and you see the geometry in the roots of a tree,
Mm,
or in a cell, right? In a membrane, in
mm,
whatever the thing is, everything has a fingerprint, and it's unique. And, it reminds me a lot of just humanity and people, where, something that I am a big believer in is equality. And what I do not like, and maybe I don't like it too much, but is favoritism, or the idea of just being special, right? The ego
mm-hmm.
wants to be special. The ego wants
Mm-hmm.
to be a favorite. The ego wants to be something more or above. And the interesting thing is, whether it's the geometry that we find out in nature, or it's the geometry within ourself, whatever it is, none of this stuff is better than or worse than. It's just uniquely different and so intricately designed. And this isn't even an argument for a creator, because I think that we're beyond that. I think we're just looking at a consciousness that cannot help but put its fingerprint in everything that it touches, and not out of
Mm-hmm.
ego, just out of just pure, just creative force and energy. That fingerprint is stamped into everything, whether that's humanity, animals, nature, weather phenomenon, you name it. It's just everywhere. And that's the beauty of being able to see this stuff. Yeah. So no, I love what you said. And as far as
Yeah.
like when the drawing happens and stuff, yeah, I guess it depends on what's being drawn, or what the actual thing is, what it represents. But a lot of times it correlates without me even knowing it, which could be a
Mm-hmm.
good segue into the Merkaba, if you want to
Yeah.
go there.
Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So little background on when I say Merkaba. Merkaba is represented by a shape. It's two intersecting tetrahedrons, so it kind of looks like in 3D. It's like a star, I guess you could say, and it spins essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But in the actual word Merkaba, now you'll probably find different definitions of it based on different cultures. In Egyptian, and again, it's important to note, well, not again, but for the first time I'm saying this, it's important to note that this shape and this word, it's uniquely found in different cultures. So, there's arguments that say that the Egyptians had it first. And if I went with that, what it means in ancient Egyptian is it's actually split up into 3 words. So it's Mer, space, Ka, space, Ba, right? Merkaba.
Mm-hmm.
And it's light, spirit, body. So we have that. In Hebrew, there's actually a branch of mysticism, Judaic mysticism, called Merkaba mysticism. It's not well known. It was a lot more popular, probably
Was that like an
second.
offshoot of Kabbalah?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they take things a little further than Kabbalah even. So
Mm-hmm.
Kabbalah, again, someone can totally fact check me, or correct me if I'm wrong. But what I've researched, what I can find, their primary symbol, if you will, is the tree of life symbol, and not the tree of life in the Eastern tree of life that I'm wearing that looks like a tree, but it's their shapes, they're circles, and they kind of come down. There's 10 circles, and they represent different things, similar to the chakras. They
Mm-hmm.
represent different things within the actual human body. So,
Right.
but the Merkaba mysticism kind of takes it a step further. And what I found, during this journey, after leaving the church and even while I was going to the church, I was exploring. I had been exploring all this stuff, the books of Enoch and a lot of the Gnostic gospels, to the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary,
Mm-hmm.
Mary Magdalene, the
Mm-hmm.
Apocryphon. Right? There's a lot of good stuff in there. And again, I was told that this stuff was extra biblical and could be dangerous and all this stuff, and I was like, well, that's
Mm-hmm.
great. Then it's for me. It's definitely for me. So I guess one thing led to another when I was reading third Enoch. So three Enoch. There's first Enoch, which a lot of people, if you're into any of this esoteric stuff, you'd kind of know what first Enoch is, and no one believes it was actually transcribed by Enoch, but through oral tradition, this
Mm-hmm.
was written. So first Enoch, and a lot of that has to do with Enoch being taken up into heaven and being shown a lot of apocalyptic phenomena, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Third Enoch is interesting. Third Enoch speaks of Enoch being, well, I guess I'll take it even further back than this. Rabbi Ishmael was the gentleman's name who wrote Third Enoch for maybe second century, late first, early second century rabbi, Jewish rabbi. It's accredited to him. 3 Enoch. He has an encounter where he is taken up, like we were talking about Paul before. He was taken up into the heavens, into another realm, and was shown. It's kind of broken up if you read it by chapter. He's shown different areas of the heavens, and it's kind of each chapter is a different area. But he's escorted
Mm-hmm.
by an individual that he meets at the beginning, who introduces himself as the archangel Metatron. Metatron is, if you know sacred geometry, is there's a shape called Metatron's cube. It's not a cube. It's not a cube. It looks totally different. Google it, and you'll see that it's really complicated. And the crux of it basically is that it houses all of the Platonic solids within it, and they intersect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surrounded by 6 circles, and then 6 more circles. So Metatron's cube, we have represented in this shape. The archangel Metatron is this individual that Rabbi Ishmael meets and is escorted through the heavens by this archangel. So I was already doing sacred geometry when I was reading this, and I was like, holy crap, what is this? This
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of Metatron being a person before.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to note that Rabbi Ishmael, he was he prescribed to this Merkaba mysticism. So the Merkaba mysticism, they actually call it, instead of, a lot of times when we speak of these encounters or mystic encounters, we speak of ascension, going upwards. The Merkaba mysticism, they call it descent mysticism. And it doesn't mean going into hell. It means going within, descent into yourself, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
That it's the idea of you house the cosmos. So instead of an out there heaven, it's an in here heaven, which I love. That's beautiful. So,
Yeah.
so Metatron, escorts Rabbi Ishmael around the heavens and shows him all this stuff, and it's amazing. It's a cool story, and I read it, and I got to be honest, I didn't get a ton out of the actual reading. I can't say that I walked away with a deep revelation, and I'm now like, oh my gosh, now I know what heaven looks like. It was cool. It was interesting. If you're into Marvel and sci-fi, this is gonna tickle your brain. It's exciting and it's fun. But that's kind of where I left it, and I didn't think about it a lot after I read it, and I put it down. And maybe about a week later or so, in between this week, I should say, I did do some research on Rabbi Ishmael. Just a few Google searches. Kind of wanted to see if he had anything else out there. I couldn't find a lot about him other than the Merkaba mysticism, that he was into this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of like how I found out about that. So, about a week later, I was sitting down at my table doing some sacred geometry. I was drawing specifically a Merkaba. So a Merkaba, if you highlight it correctly or you shade it correctly, it's inside of Metatron's cube. So essentially, I'll do my best to explain it, but basically, if you draw Metatron's cube, the Merkaba is in there. The shape of it is in there. If you highlight it correctly, or you shade it, or you just outline that shape specifically, you will see it, and it will pop to the it will pop out to the viewer. You'll be able to see it. So you kind of have to draw Metatron's cube in order to draw a Merkaba. I did. So I was drawing Metatron's cube, but I was specifically drawing it to highlight the Merkaba. This is right before, maybe 3 days before we had cut contact with this church, before we completely disconnected. So I was in a very vulnerable state. I'm only mentioning that because of I'm going to speak to an encounter that happened during this meditative practice. So mentally, emotionally, I was in a very vulnerable place and open though. Something I take a lot of joy in is I've always found it fairly easy to be vulnerable. Whether that's interpersonally with people, now there's a downside to this. Obviously, you can get hurt easily, if you, right. So I've had to learn how to set boundaries and, not overshare. However, I enjoy being open. I like having an open heart. And I enjoy that feeling. So even with the tension of, are we going to leave this church? Are we not? Everything that was going on, I still felt very tender and very vulnerable and open. And I don't mean vulnerable in the sense of like open to attack. I mean more so just tender.
Right.
And so I'm drawing this Metatron's cube. I'm drawing the Merkaba. Kind of. I don't want to say business as usual, but nothing out of the ordinary is happening while I'm drawing. My daughters are at home; they're running around and stuff, and one of them's taking a nap, and one of them's asking me to fill their water bottle and things like that. So life is happening around me, and I don't know, maybe an hour or two into drawing, I set it down, and it's not complete. I just set it aside. And a lot of times that's how things go. I'll do maybe the outline, I'll take a break, come to it the next day or later that night or whatever it is. So it wasn't complete. However, I was putting a lot of attention into this Merkaba. I was putting a lot of focus and intentionality into that shape specifically, but also mentally and emotionally what it meant for early century Jews who were, who believed in this mystic, this mystic belief, right? One of the things I didn't mention is what Merkaba means in Hebrew. It actually means chariot throne. So it's a chariot throne. So it's this idea of a throne with wheels, essentially wheels and wings. There's images of it out there, that people have done carvings and stuff like that. So that's what it means. So I'm drawing. Everything is going good. I set it aside. And where I usually do my drawing and stuff is close to the kitchen. So I go over to the kitchen. I think I was washing dishes or something. I was doing something at the sink with my back towards the kitchen. And as I stated earlier, I don't think this is something unique to me. However, I do believe it, and it does happen for me with ease, I should say, is encountering those who have transitioned. So the Christians would call them the saints, other cultures would call them ancestors, call them whatever you want, people who have transitioned out of their physical body. So this is something that I've experienced before with loved ones. It's something I've experienced before with other figures from history. And I was standing at the sink and, facing the sink with my back towards the kitchen. And I have a sensation of Rabbi Ishmael, bear with me here, behind me, and he is placing his hands along my spine. So he's got one hand up towards like the top of my neck area, and one hand up my lower back, but along my spine. At the same time, I have this. I'm saying have this sensation because there's no way to fully identify or anything like that. But this is what happened. On my right hand side was Enoch and Peter. On my left hand side was Moses and Paul. So we have 5 transitioned beings in the room. As soon as I felt their presence, and Rabbi Ishmael was touching my spine, I just started to weep. So I'm kind of like leaning over my sink at this point, just weeping. And this release of emotion just comes out of me. Now I'm an easy crier. If you know me, I cry watching Disney movies. I'm no shame in saying I enjoy a good cry, and it is not hard to make me cry. Essentially, I'm a sensitive soul, but not like this. This was different, and this was a floodgate of emotions. At the same time, while this is happening, I close my eyes and I find myself, I'm going to join with Paul here and say whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, but I find myself inside of a golden Merkaba, so a spinning Merkaba. So the actual shape, not the chariot throne image, but the shape of a Merkaba. Inside of it, it's gold, it's spinning, and I'm in just black space, I guess you could call it. There's no stars, there's no planets, a galaxy, there's not, just black, void. Would probably be the best word. And I'm inside of this, and it's moving. We're moving. I'm moving in it. And again, like time is kind of hard to perceive during these things. So, right. What felt like maybe 5 seconds could have been longer. I don't know. But either way, a moment of time had passed, a short moment of time. And when I came out of this void, I found myself still inside of this Merkaba in what felt like inside of what looks like a Greek Colosseum. And by that I mean like stone, white stone, pillars, marble, that kind of looking, kind of what you would picture, but not decayed, very, very new, like it was just built. So I'm in the center, and there are stairs all around me going upwards. So I'm in the middle, stairs all around me. The best way I can explain it is it almost felt like there should have been a fountain where I was, like a fountain in the middle kind of flowing, and there were stairs surrounding it. But instead of a fountain, it was this Merkaba, and I'm sitting or standing inside of it. Then all of a sudden I look around, I look around and I look up these stairs, and there's different individuals. I don't recognize them, but they start approaching and walking down the stairs towards me, towards my direction. I didn't say this out loud, but I felt it and I thought it, and I had this feeling of unworthiness. And I thought to myself, like, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to be here right now. This doesn't feel like somewhere I deserve to be. And as soon as I thought that, everything froze. It was like someone hit the pause button on this experience I was having. And the people, they stopped mid-step. The Merkaba stopped spinning. Everything just froze. I kind of talked myself out of that, I guess you could say. And I was like, okay. No, I deserve to be here. Kind of like did some positive affirmations to myself. I was like, okay, I deserve to be here. All right. That kind of thing. Someone pressed the play button essentially, and this thing started back up, and these people, or maybe not people, but these beings started walking my direction. And as they started walking my direction, I fell to my knees, and this I know happened in real life because when I came out of this, I was on my knees in the kitchen. So I fell to my knees inside of this Merkaba, but also in real life too, in 3D. And I had my head kind of down and my eyes closed. And when in prior encounters with Holy Spirit, as Christians would call Holy Spirit, that being has always appeared to me as feminine. It's always appeared to me as a woman, obviously not human, but feminine in nature, I should say. Flowy, wind-like, silky, smooth, and wine colored is how Holy Spirit always appears to me. So make of that what you will, but that's how I relate to Holy Spirit, and that's how I've seen her, I will say. And that being who I identify as Holy Spirit was there with me and was at my side, but outside of the Merkaba, outside of it, and I'm still inside of it. And she says to me words that have changed the way I kind of look at, changed the way I look at really existence as a whole. And she said to me, "Don't worry, you cannot mess this up. This is happening whether you want it to or not. We are just letting you see it." And I can speak to what that meant to me afterwards, but in the moment it blew my mind, and I had this realization of, oh wow, like there's legitimately things happening that I am just completely unaware of all the time, and I don't even have there's another me out there somewhere that things are happening to. There's an ascended me. There's a higher consciousness of me that things are happening to all the time. I'm just being given permission to see this right now. That was the sensation. That is what she said to me. So that kind of gave me the confidence to say, I can't mess this up. Like she said, like just be here now, like Ram Dass, right? Be here now. Right. And I was. So I opened up my eyes and I picked my head up, still in this kneeling position, and in front of me is a lamb, a small, young lamb. And it's walking around me, around this Merkaba, counterclockwise. I can't tell you how many times it walked around me, but it was doing circles around this Merkaba counterclockwise, this lamb. As it walked around me, rainbows started shooting out of my chest, my body, my solar plex, just the whole front of my body. Rainbows just started shooting out of me. And when I say rainbows, it wasn't just one rainbow. It was a color of the rainbow, then another color of the rainbow, then another color. But they were these, vibrant colors of the rainbow started shooting out of my body. And that is all that I remember of the actual experience. That happened, and then that was, I guess I can only speculate that was too much for me to handle, and I zip zap back to reality here, I guess. But when I came out of that, when I lifted up my head and I stood up and I was back in my home, I had this song, not actually audibly playing, but I had this song in my head, I guess. And it's by Upper Room, where they're a Christian like worship group out of Texas, I believe. And the song is called "Open the Scroll." And I don't listen to a lot of worship music now. It just doesn't resonate with me, and I wasn't listening to a ton then. So this song wouldn't have been. It just wasn't something that would have been on my radar at that time. I hadn't heard it in a long time, but the song essentially goes, it's based off this verse out of Revelation, I think 4, about who's worthy to open the scroll, right? There's this scroll that's sealed with 7 seals along the spine. And people are saying, who's worthy to open the scroll? No one's found worthy in the earth, but then there's a lamb. This lamb is found worthy, and the lamb breaks the seals of the scroll, and no one knows the idea is no one knows what's written in this scroll on the inside. So I had that song. I decided to look it up in Google. I found that, I hadn't read that verse in a long time, and I'm making these connections, of the spine, the 7, the opening of the scroll, the lamb. And I still don't know fully what exactly happened to me, but what I can say is it felt like an awakening. And I believe that my chakras, my energy centers, were blocked, closed,
Hmm.
whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call it. They were not as active. And this encounter, call it a Kundalini awakening, opened those energy centers. And that was 3 days before we made the decision to walk away from this church and kind of walk away from all systems in general, and really find freedom. Um, and I believe that awakening drew the courage and the confidence from within to make that decision. So yeah, so make of that what you will. I know it's hard to believe. I know it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, okay, maybe, kind of thing. But it's that's what happened to me, and I'm
Yeah.
sticking to it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. I mean, the way I look at things is, everybody has their experiences in life, and it's true that it was an experience for them. What it meant, whether that's symbolic or literal or whatever, all that is, who knows. But I think it's fascinating. I think it's worth looking into these things, and so um, and maybe you probably already talked about it, but what did this experience, what did that do for you? How'd that impact
Right.
your life?
Right. So, I think this is the one of the ways to measure mystical, let's call them mystical encounters, whether it's
Hmm.
induced because of plant medicine, or it's induced because of meditation or prayer or a spiritual religious experience, whatever it is, some kind of otherworldly encounter that can't be explained, that wouldn't have happened otherwise. Um, I think the way to measure it, one way to measure it is the fruit, the tangible fruit, as the Bible calls it,
Right.
um, evidence, 3-dimensional evidence. And for me, I believe, and I've sat with this for a while, and I've thought about it. I believe that my throat chakra was blocked. I believe there were things that I needed to say, things that needed to
Hmm.
be expressed, um, things that I needed to hear first myself say,
Hmm.
let alone anybody else hear. But so what came out of that was an opening. I was wide open after that, and there was a confidence, there was an awareness, there was a heart and a mind connection. That tenderness that was there never left, but now it had something to do. Now it had not a mission, but it knew what its purpose was. Right. It kind of, was that the moment of awakening? I don't know. I think that it was a place on the timeline of my life that I would say was significant. Um,
Hmm.
and I think, it's important to note for anybody who has any kind of, you know, um, mystical experience or encounter like that, the Bible says this, and again, I don't like to use the Bible as proof for anything, because it's just one
Hmm.
of one of many books that are helpful. But this is something that's helpful, and I want to say Paul again. Shout out to Paul, but he says, you know that you can speak with angels, you can
Hmm.
do this, have all these different like big
Right.
spiritual things. You can speak in tongues, speak with angels, blah blah blah. But if you don't have love, you're just a clanging cymbal. You have nothing. If you
Hmm.
don't have love, you have nothing, right? So the evidence, the fruit of any kind of mystical spiritual experience, spiritual ritual, should be love. Otherwise, it's just making noise. So if I came on here and was just saying, well, yeah, look at what all this stuff is, look at all these cool things that are happening, but have nothing tangible to show for it. Well, that's really just making noise. And what I mean by to show for it, it doesn't have to be like tangible, like a resource, like money, or like some kind of manifestation, thing. But is there peace? Do you have peace?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have joy? Do you have, is there love in your marriage? Do your children trust you? These are the things that matter, right? Like, things priorities start to shift as you mature, and it's less about, not that money isn't important. We all need it. And then unfortunately that's still the currency of our current civilization. But, it's not all about the things you can put your hands on. It's deeper than that. It's bigger than that. So yeah, so I would say, for me, it's brought an awareness, it's brought courage, it's brought all kinds of positive things in my life. But I would say that is a measuring stick for me for anytime I
Mm-hmm.
hear people's encounters. It's like, okay, but is there love, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's beautiful. I totally agree. That's great. Um, one last question. I know earlier you were talking about night terrors. Did they stop around this time, or is that a different thing?
So that was a different time. That was back in probably 2020, 2021. It was another, believe it or not, it was another mystical experience
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that I can speak about if you'd like.
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, for sure. So so I had when I was in the Marine Corps, I had a one very notable night terror where, I did some research on it, and in medieval times, the way people would explain night terrors, I don't know if you've ever heard this before, they would call it the witch that sits on your chest in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah.
would be this idea where you'd wake up in the middle of the night and there would be something
Sleep paralysis.
suffocating you.
Mm-hmm.
They called it the witch, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
their cultural reference. Obviously it's different now, but in the Marine Corps, I had woken up to a figure, non-human figure, sitting on my chest and crushing me. And it was one of those things where I couldn't wake up. It just wasn't happening. And that was probably the most significant one, excuse me, that I had ever had. And there's a lot that goes into it, but basically that was kind of, the most memorable one. Fast forward to, a grown man, maybe 2 years ago. And I was, I'll kind of set the scene here. It was ready to put the kids to bed. And my wife and I are getting ready to end the night kind of thing. And I'm upstairs, she's downstairs. I was brushing my teeth maybe, or whatever, something in the bathroom. And, I noticed I wasn't feeling well. I noticed just a little off balance, a little lightheaded, just kind of off, and I just yelled downstairs and I was like, hey, hey babe, I'm really not feeling that good. I don't know if maybe we ate something bad, but just a heads up, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to go to bed. I'm just going to lay down and I'll see you when you get up here kind of thing. So I laid down and the room started spinning and I really wasn't feeling good. And this isn't something that's common for me. I don't get sick very often at all. I definitely don't get lightheaded or headaches. So I yelled back downstairs and I was like, hey, babe, I'm really not feeling good. I don't know what's going on, but I maybe bring up some Tylenol or water or something, by the time my wife had come upstairs, I was on my back. Staring at the ceiling, and I had not fallen asleep, but I was in a state of paralysis, where I couldn't move. I was as flat as a board, and out of the ceiling was coming a old man looking figure, with its mouth open in a like a devouring kind of
Mm-hmm.
way. And it was hovering over me and kind of getting closer, but then backing up, getting closer, backing up. And around this old man figure were these just floating heads with teeth and just, your typical, like what you would picture, evil looking figures just floating heads
Mm-hmm.
around this thing. Now I'm terrified. Now my wife came upstairs and she sees the panic in my eyes. I'm not screaming. I'm not crying. Just panic, just sheer panic, fear. And she comes to the side of the bed where I'm at, and she's like, are you okay? Kind of thing. And I was like looking at the ceiling still, and she sees I'm not looking like at the ceiling. I'm looking at something that's in between the ceiling and here, kind of thing. There's something here.
Mm-hmm.
And she had that feeling that there was some kind of presence, in the room, or at least a figment of my imagination. Again, in the body, out of the body, I do not know, but this is what happened. And she starts praying for me. She's like, then she's like, do I call an ambulance? Like, I don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden, this paralysis and no emotion turns into this scream, really, almost like this childlike scream, where I curled up into a fetal position on the bed and started screaming. And I didn't know anything else to do except say, Jesus, help me. Jesus, help me. I help. That's it. I really couldn't get anything else out. And maybe that lasted 2 minutes, maybe even not. Maybe it was only a minute. But as I'm screaming, Jesus, help, all of a sudden, this is the way it felt to me. And this is what I believe happened, mystically, was I believe the presence of Christ escorted me to the Father. That's what it felt like. I had this feeling of a presence, a light escorting me to the Father's lap, so to speak. It was like this strong light presence escorted to like this safe and like comforting presence. It's really hard to explain, but that's what happened. And when I eventually calmed down, my wife was sitting next to me now on the bed, and I looked over at her, and I'm just in this state of like, not really totally sure what's going on still, and not really fully here, not really fully there. And I just told her, she reminded me of this. I told her, I said, I'm not broken. I'm not broken. I said that over and over. I'm not broken. I'm not broken. The next morning, we went to sleep that night. The next morning I was washing dishes. Again, the sink seems to be a portal for me. But I was washing dishes at the sink, and I was looking out the window, and I said to myself, I was like, oh, I'm not ashamed anymore. It was that moment was shame had exited my life. And I had never, I'm not saying I've never felt guilty for anything ever again, but shame as a mindset, as a stronghold in my life, didn't exist after that moment, and neither have night terrors. And now I love the night. Now I go outside and watch the stars and hang out in the night all the time. So it happened in a moment.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, it's really interesting. I can see, I used to have trouble going to sleep. I didn't have night terrors, but shame was a very big part. And at night, you're alone with your thoughts, and so that shame is really gonna come there. And I do think there's something to our trauma and negativity and these things, and how that can, I don't know which comes first, chicken or the egg, whether that's like, lower entities are causing these things, or if these things are allowing those to have a hold of us. It's all interconnected. But yeah, when we deal with one, then it deals with the other. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. I don't want to sound or come off like I don't give a lot of attention or credit to like darkness or like, demons, or, I really don't have the same way I don't have a firm theology, because I like to keep an open mind. I don't have a firm like demonology, you could say, because again, I don't know if these things are real in the sense of, can they actually harm you physically? Can they cause you three-dimensional pain and stuff? I know the effects, are maybe, maybe the effects are more real than an actual cut or abrasion.
Hmm.
I think a cut or abrasion would be easier to deal with than a
Right.
mindset of shame,
Uh-huh.
for 30 years or
Right.
28 years or whatever it was,
Hmm.
um, so whether they're real or not, who knows? But it's like, man, the effects are real. But
Right.
so is light, right? So is light, and
Hmm.
the effects are real. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So go for it.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your story and your wisdom. You didn't take a lot of I mean, I did ask questions and reflect, but you already have that, and so you didn't need a lot from me. And yeah, congratulations on the longest podcast
Oh yeah, is
so
it?
far. But
Nice.
it's yeah, it's been amazing. I've really enjoyed it. Is there any last things that you'd like to touch on?
Oh man, I'll be honest. For me, it's again vulnerability. Blessing or a curse. I'll be honest. It's refreshing to speak to you. This conversation is refreshing. Where my wife and I are at right now is, we have left behind our community that we thought
Hmm.
was family, that was for us, and so we are in a place where we don't get to have a lot of these conversations with other people, right? It's not common to find people who can not only hold the intellectual stuff, but also can go there with you mystically and can say, wow, like that's
Hmm.
pretty wild, but like I'm not saying I don't believe you. You know what I mean? Like I'm not ready to
Right. Right. Yeah.
say I for sure know what that is, but like man, like that's
Hmm.
pretty cool. And so just thank you, for stepping out and starting this podcast. Thank you for reaching out to me and all that. Thank you for giving me a platform to speak on. And I think I could do this all day if I'm being honest. Like this is my favorite thing. Discord and
Yeah.
this is it for me. If I could do this my whole life, I'd be happy. You know,
Yeah.
I think I think the only thing I would say is, it's just I don't know if it's a statement or I don't know what it is. It's a thought. I would just encourage, especially I can speak to people who have walked a similar path to myself, which is people with a religious background, specifically Christianity, but it doesn't have to be limited to that. But anybody who has found themselves searching, found themselves in a religious system, but not having that itch scratched, not having that eternal itch, right? That eternal,
Hmm.
desire fulfilled. I would just encourage people to stop looking outside of themselves. That is the hopefully the message that's coming across on my social media or anywhere I am is, there's obviously the people that triggers would be people who benefit from the narrative, people who benefit from the system and the institution, right? And I don't need
Hmm.
to name names or name titles, but whether that's in government or it's in religion or it's in education, there are systems that I believe we're in a transition of ages. We can
Hmm.
go on a whole nother probably conversation about
Yeah.
the zodiacs and the signs and stuff. But I believe
Hmm.
we're in a transition of ages into Aquarius, which I believe is an age of intuition, an age of the spirit. And I don't mean the Holy Spirit
Hmm.
or something religious. I just mean that thing that's in you and I, that's in all of us, that knows
Hmm.
what to do, that knows where to, that thing that's guiding us, that internal compass. And I think for years and generations, we have seen systems fail us. We have seen systems not just fail us, but hurt us and traumatize us. And we have given our power and authority and our sovereignty away to systems, to people, and to ideologies. And I think it's time to reclaim that. And it's time to believe in the God inside of us, to really believe. If you really want to believe in God, start with the one inside of you, right? Start with the one inside of you and trust that voice. I like to say a lot that there's a knower in you. There's something that knows, right? The Gnostic Christians would call this gnosis. Doesn't matter what you call it. Doesn't matter what you call it. It's an inner knowing. It doesn't come from a book. It doesn't come from even me saying this. It's something that just, and you're made for more than this. You're made for more than a religious ritual. And there's nothing wrong with ritual. I have rituals, but the ritual is not the thing. The ritual is not the God.
Right.
And so I would just say that stop looking for God outside of yourself, stop looking for truth outside of yourself, and start going within, inner space before outer space, right? Like let's get this, there's something, I have this verse tattooed on my hand, John 17:21. And it's the prayer, Jesus's prayer at the, his final prayer before the crucifixion and stuff. And he says, this verse specifically says, Father, make them one, make them all one, as you and I are one. And, we can interpret that on the surface level. It's about unity, make them all united, right? Make them one, of one mind and one accord and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's good. And that's a good place to start. Don't stop there though, because that's about the individual being a whole individual. That's about the person being whole, not separate, not other than, not an island to themselves, not just, just being an individual out here and not caring about society, but make them one, make them whole, make them, we talk about unity, the unity of the church, the unity of the body, the unity of the whatever it is. And it's like, there can be no unity of the corporate cosmic body until there's unity of the body, the individual body. Right. And I think that whether I'm speaking to a pastor, or I'm speaking to a government leader, or whether I'm speaking to, a soccer mom or a stay-at-home dad or a construction, it doesn't matter. Whoever you are, there is something within you. And that thing I believe is that consciousness, that God, that Christ, that divine spark, is another name for it. But that thing wants to make you one, and wants to show you that you are one already with God and with everyone else. And I think once we realize that, once we awaken to that, even to a small degree, I'm nowhere near where I know I'll be 20 years from now, but just the small degree of oneness that I'm starting to realize opens my eyes to everybody else around me. Right? It's like, I couldn't be isolated if I tried. I can go in the grocery store and have a conversation with someone because I see the light in them. I can go, down the road and notice an animal and see the light in the animal. Richard Rohr talks about seeing Christ in his dog, and everybody was offended because it's like, how could you say that? Well, it's when you see it, you can't unsee it. And, again, I would just say, hopefully the message that comes across is not one of frustration or even hurt, although the hurt is there. Maybe there is some frustration there still, but hopefully the message is just seek first, like Jesus said, the kingdom. And if we go with his message of where the kingdom is within you. Seek first the kingdom, and everything else, it'll take care of itself. It'll be added unto you. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is we don't take his words. I used to say we take the Bible too literally. I think we don't take it literal enough sometimes. And we don't put these pieces together, that if the kingdom of heaven is within you, and we're being encouraged to seek the kingdom within first, man, like that's about inner work. Right. So I know that was a lot, but yeah, that's it, man.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you put it well. I totally agree. And yeah, this podcast is all about making these experiences and these journeys, normalizing them and bringing them out in the open and discussing them. And like you said, it's all about becoming who we are, and that inner work and that inner connection to the spirit. and who we truly are. So I
That's
think
funny.
that's a great way to end. So
I didn't even think of the name of the podcast. That's hilarious. I didn't even think of that. That's synchronicities. Go figure. I love
right,
it.
yeah, yeah. So thank you so much, Josiah. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.